The private dining suite on the 49th floor was engineered for intimidation. Soft amber lights, velvet acoustics, and a 12-seat obsidian table polished to a mirror's black sheen. It was a room built for decisions that could tilt economies. Tonight, one such decision waited at the center. A $240 million acquisition contract resting inside a leather folio, its gold corner clips glinting like trapped suns. She stood by the wall, the last person anyone expected to matter. A waitress. Plain black uniform. Hair pinned with the precision of someone who didn't want to be seen. Her name tag read Mira, though not a single guest had looked directly at it. Across the table sat Sheikh Rafiq al-Dahan, a man whose reputation for the humiliating staff was whispered long before he arrived. His advisors formed a tight crescent around him, murmuring in a clipped Gulf dialect, confident the help would never understand. When Mira stepped closer to refill his glass, he didn't bother to look at her. He waved a dismissive hand and muttered in that same dialect, low, cutting, the kind of phrase meant to slice without leaving a mark. A small, cruel line about her posture, her silence, her presumed ignorance. A few of the advisors smirked. One chuckled behind a fist. Mira froze for half a breath, not from shame, but from recognition. She inhaled once, set the crystal decanter down, and answered him softly in flawless classical Arabic, her pronunciation arching like a blade polished to a mirror edge. The room dropped into a vacuum of stunned stillness. Every advisor's head lifted in the same second, confusion tightening the space like a vice. Even the sheikh's eyes flickered. Surprise, then something darker, something unsettled. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. Mira retreated to the service alcove, a narrow corridor hidden behind a bronze-paneled sliding door. In that thin slice of space, the soundproofing faltered just enough for her to hear the stunned silence she had left behind. A silence she knew wouldn't stay silent for long. Her hands trembled, not from fear of the sheikh, but from the old reflex she could never quite unlearn. Stay small, stay invisible, stay safe. She pressed her fingertips to the metal counter, grounding herself in the cool texture. She had promised herself she wouldn't speak Arabic today, not the classical register that carried too much memory. Not in this place, where a single display of knowledge could be mistaken for arrogance, or worse, provoke questions she could not afford to answer. Her life outside this building was a brittle construct. A rented room above a car repair shop, student debt ballooned by interest, immigration paperwork stalled for months, and the constant anxiety of being one mistake away from losing everything. Knowledge had never protected her. It had only drawn the wrong eyes. But when the sheikh mocked her in his dialect, a casual cruelty, flung without thought, something in her had cracked. Not pride, something older. The echo of years spent studying under fluorescent lights, parsing ancient manuscripts she would never be credited for, cataloging dialectual evolutions no one believed she understood. Inside the dining suite, chairs shifted. Voices rose. Footsteps approached the alcove. She straightened, smoothing her apron, forcing her breath to settle as the door slid open. One of the sheikh's advisors stepped in. A tall man with a tailored charcoal suit and the kind of posture that screamed impatience. His expression carried confusion, irritation, and a faint edge of embarrassment. "You," he said, tapping a finger toward her, "come back inside, now." She nodded, following him into the suite. The sheikh watched her return. His eyes had narrowed, not in anger, but in appraisal, like a collector spotting an unexpected detail on an artifact he believed he already owned. He switched to the same clipped Gulf dialect, but slower this time, testing boundaries. "Where did you learn that register?" She answered in English, voice even, neutral. At university. The advisors exchanged glances. One whispered, another frowned. A third flipped open the contract folio on the table, as if grounding himself in the one thing that made sense. The sheikh leaned back, folding his hands. "Impressive," he said. The word was not a compliment. It was a probe. She remained silent. She had already spoken more than she should have today. And yet, beneath the surface, something larger was shifting. A tension growing in the room, subtle but unmistakable. The kind that precedes a miscalculation worth hundreds of millions. Invisibility protects until the moment it doesn't. Mira resumed her place by the wall, the position she had perfected over months. Silent, still, peripheral. But inside, her pulse thudded like a fist against a locked door. The sheikh's advisors kept glancing at her in quick, sharp motions. The kind used when someone disrupts the established hierarchy simply by existing. She hated that feeling. Being seen. A year ago, she had been the promising one. The linguistics student who outperformed scholars twice her age. The quiet prodigy cataloging medieval manuscripts in the dim basement archives of the university library. She spent entire nights tracing the evolution of marginalia, identifying micro-variations in diacritical systems, mapping shifts in legal phrasing across centuries. But brilliance did not shield her from collapse. Her advisor resigned unexpectedly. Grants were withdrawn. The visa that tethered her identity to the institution dissolved in a fog of bureaucracy. One administrative decision, and the ground fell out from beneath her life. The debts came next. Then the jobs. The ones that required silence. Tonight she had taken this shift only because another waitress called out sick. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to hear anything. And she certainly wasn't supposed to understand a dialect that most graduate scholars couldn't parse without notes. She felt the humiliation rising again. Not for herself, but for how predictable her invisibility had become. People like her were expected to serve water, not decode centuries-old linguistic registers or understand the legal architecture of multi-million-dollar acquisitions. The sheikh's chief advisor, a silver-haired man with sharp cheekbones and the demeanor of someone who believed he carried the room's intellect, began summarizing the contract. His voice droned with confidence. "Everything is ready for your signature, sir. The acquisition terms are airtight." Airtight. Mira's breath hitched at the word. She had heard it too many times in the archives, usually preceding a discovery of something that wasn't. The sheikh nodded, but distractedly, casting another side glance at her. "Let us proceed." She pretended not to notice. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing, on the tray in her hands, on the way the table's obsidian surface reflected halos of light. Her thoughts drifted to the last manuscript she ever worked on. A 14th century legal treatise annotated by 3 different hands, each one trying to outsmart the next. She had learned then that traps in texts are almost never loud. They hide in footnotes, in odd spacing, in a shift of syntax no one expects. Back in the suite, the advisors began flipping pages. The sheikh, satisfied enough, reached for the pen. A ripple of unease moved through Mira's chest. Faint, but persistent. Sometimes the smallest detail reveals whether a document is telling the truth or only pretending to. Mira was already calculating her exit. 2 more minutes. She would step out quietly, slip through the service hall, clock out early, and disappear into the night like she always did. Whatever was unsettling her about that contract wasn't her problem. She was a waitress tonight, nothing more. But the room had other plans. Just as she shifted her weight toward the door, the sheikh raised a hand. Without looking at her, "You," he said, voice steady, controlled. "Stay." It wasn't a command delivered in anger. It was worse. It was delivered as if he already expected obedience, as if keeping her here required no justification. The advisors paused mid-page turn, glancing up with the synchronized unease of men sensing a deviation from script. Mira froze. "Sir, I—" "Stay," he repeated, softer but heavier. Her throat tightened. There was no appropriate refusal, not without consequences she could not afford. So she stayed, stepping back into her position by the wall, tray held against her ribs like a shield. The sheikh studied her again, eyes narrow, calculating. His expression wasn't predatory. It was analytical, almost academic. A collector assessing a rare artifact that behaved in an unexpected way. His advisors resumed their work, though their voices had lost a degree of confidence. "We've prepared everything," the chief advisor said, tapping the final page. "The offshore structure is aligned. The guarantees are secured. Once you sign, the asset transitions immediately." Mira exhaled slowly. Something about the phrasing scraped against her nerves. Not the content, but the precision of the word guarantees. It was the same false precision she'd seen in forged manuscripts, where a scribe overcorrected punctuation to hide a textual splice. She forced herself to look away. She could not get involved. A steaming dish arrived from the kitchen, and she stepped forward to place it on the table. As she leaned in, her eyes flicked, unintentionally, to the contract folio lying open beneath the sheikh's hand. 3 lines. Just 3. A fragment of a clause at the bottom of the page. A transition phrase that didn't belong to the legal register used above it. A shift in spacing too deliberate to be accidental. Her stomach clenched. The chef called her name from the service door. It was her last chance to leave, to hand off the tray, to escape the gravitational pull of this moment. But she couldn't. She wasn't sure why. Only that her feet refused to move. The sheikh clicked the pen open. Her pulse spiked. That faint, nagging discomfort bloomed into something sharper. The unmistakable sensation of a trap, lying in plain sight. Every room has a point of no return. She had just crossed it. The moment the sheikh uncapped his pen, the advisors entered their practiced choreography. Bodies leaning forward, pages aligned, voices lowering to a reverent hush. They wanted to project inevitability. Contracts this large were never signed. They were performed. The chief advisor swept a hand toward the folio. "Your Highness, the due diligence teams found no irregularities. Every seal, every clause, every valuation metric is validated. The document is—" He paused, letting the word bloom with theatrical weight. "Perfect." Mira felt the air tighten around her. Perfect. She had heard that word used as a shield more than as a description. Professors used it to end discussions they didn't want to continue. Collectors used it to silence concerns about provenance. And forgers used it when they wanted to discourage a second glance. But she stayed still. Silent. A ghost with a tray. The advisors continued, each eager to impress the sheikh. "The asset's valuation is conservative," one said. "The arbitration clauses are balanced," said another. "The foreign entity exemptions are airtight," added a third. Airtight. Again. The words scratched at her mind like sand caught under glass. The sheikh nodded, but she could sense his attention drifting back to her, drawn by the echo of her classical Arabic earlier, as if some unarticulated part of him suspected he had overlooked something, or someone, more significant than he intended. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. If she met his eyes, she feared she might say something. And if she said something, everything would collapse. She focused instead on controlling her breath, on the glint of polished obsidian beneath the contract, on the faint hum of the HVAC system behind the walls. The suite was designed to be acoustically perfect, so every page turn seemed amplified, every pen movement magnified. One advisor slid a final document across the table. "The transfer of liabilities section," he said. "Fully compliant. Nothing unexpected." Mira felt a jolt, small but unmistakable. Nothing unexpected. But liabilities transfers were never simple. They were labyrinths. She had spent months studying medieval property deeds whose entire purpose was to disguise burdens under ornamental language. Her throat tightened as she remembered one professor's warning, spoken years ago over a cracked manuscript. The moment a document claims simplicity, it's lying. The advisors waited for the sheikh's approval. He placed the pen against the signature line. Mira felt the edges of her vision contract, a soft tunnel forming, instinct trying to drag her attention back to that single clause she'd glimpsed earlier. The spacing, the shift in register, the transition phrase that didn't belong. She tried to pull her thoughts away. She had no right to speak, no place in this room, no safety net if she overstepped. But the discomfort wouldn't fade. Sometimes, perfection is the loudest evidence that something has been engineered to deceive. Mira stood still, but inside her mind was spiraling through layers of memory, training, instinct, all converging on the same point of unease. Something in the contract felt curated. That was the word. Not written. Curated, like someone had taken pieces from different documents and pressed them together with just enough care to look seamless from a distance. She forced herself to focus on the tray in her hands, but her eyes kept drifting to the folio. Not to the signature line. To the margins. Margins reveal everything. The advisors resumed their rhythm, trying to shepherd the sheikh toward the inevitable. "You can sign here, Your Highness. And here for the offshore transition. And this confirms indemnification." Indemnification. The term dropped like a stone into Mira's stomach. She had spent a year studying the evolution of indemnity clauses in pre-modern trade manuscripts. How slight shifts in phrasing transferred ruin from one party to another without changing a single overt term. It was the safest place to hide a trap, not in content, but in syntax. Her breath caught. A waiter from the kitchen tapped her shoulder. "Mira, I can take over if you want." She nodded mechanically but didn't move. She couldn't move. The sheikh glanced at her again, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. Because she wasn't blending into the walls anymore. Because she was watching something she shouldn't. Because, intuitively, he sensed that her silence carried weight. "Is there a problem?" he asked the advisors. "No, sir," the chief advisor replied quickly. "The contract is vetted by external auditors, internal counsel, and the seller's compliance team. There is nothing—" A sudden shift in his tone, a sharp inhale. The man's voice faltered by half a note. Because he saw it too. Mira noticed the moment he noticed. A microsecond of confusion as his eyes skimmed a page he clearly hadn't studied in detail. His brow folded, then smoothed, as if dismissing what he almost saw. But she knew that look. The human mind trying to overwrite an inconsistency. She had seen scholars do it with manuscripts. She had done it herself during her worst exam season. And now this advisor was doing it in front of 240 million. Mira stepped backward, pretending to adjust the tray, though she was deliberately angling for another look at the lower right section of the page, where she'd glimpsed that transition phrase earlier. There. A tiny shift in kerning. Barely perceptible. Invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But she knew. The sheikh tapped the pen impatiently. "Proceed." The advisors leaned in again, burying whatever faint doubt had brushed their awareness. Mira's pulse hammered. She felt the shape of the trap now. Not its details, but its intent. Something transferred, something concealed, something that would detonate financially the moment ink touched paper. And the room didn't know it yet. Instinct doesn't whisper when danger is near. It sharpens. The sheikh lowered the pen once more, its metal tip hovering less than an inch above the signature line. The room held its breath. Advisors aligned their posture to him like planets to a gravitational center, confident, synchronized, indifferent to everything outside their immediate orbit. Only Mira felt the room tilting. Her palms were damp against the tray. Her mind was running forensic patterns she hadn't used in a year, the habits she had buried under exhaustion and survival. She replayed those 3 lines she'd glimpsed, the transition phrase, the unnatural spacing, the change in legal register. Those weren't mistakes. They were stitching marks. A document that large should flow like a single authorial voice. But the bottom of that page had a different voice entirely. Not a change big enough for amateurs to notice, but substantial enough to signal a grafted clause. And grafts always serve one purpose: concealing a transfer of risk. She swallowed hard. The sheikh's chief advisor placed a steadying hand near the folio. Once this is signed, Your Highness, the remaining liabilities will be extinguished. The entity becomes fully compliant under your structure. Mira's stomach tightened. Remaining liabilities. That phrase was too vague, too comfortable. Liabilities don't vanish, they move. Her throat tightened as she remembered a lecture from her final semester before everything collapsed. Most fraudulent documents hide danger by assigning heavy burdens to the party least likely to read the fine print. She glanced at the sheikh. He wasn't reading anything anymore. He trusted his men, and that trust, blind, unexamined, was the perfect environment for a trap. One advisor adjusted the page slightly, revealing a glimpse of the preceding section. Mira saw it only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. A cross-reference number, incorrect formatting, a clause that pointed somewhere that didn't exist in the earlier pages. Her breath stuttered. The trap wasn't small, it was structural, hidden beneath layers of clean formatting and authoritative signatures. The contract likely included a liability transfer mechanism disguised as a compliance addendum, meaning if the sheikh signed, he wouldn't acquire an asset. He would inherit its debts, possibly catastrophic debts. Her chest tightened. She shouldn't know this. She shouldn't understand this. She was a waitress tonight, a ghost carrying plates. The pen touched the paper. She felt her pulse spike into a violent, throat-squeezing thud. The advisors leaned in. The sheikh inhaled. The ink was a millisecond from bleeding across the page. And Mira, pressed against the wall, understood with horrifying clarity that no one else in this room saw what she did. Sometimes the most dangerous moment in a negotiation is the instant when everyone believes the thinking is finished. The pen kissed the page, not enough to make a mark, just enough for the metal tip to tap the paper with a soft, decisive click. A click that, in the acoustically perfect suite, echoed like a warning shot. Mira stepped forward before she even realized she was moving. It was only a half step, tiny, barely perceptible. The kind of shift someone makes when they think they've forgotten something. But in this room, where everything was choreographed, it broke the symmetry. The chief advisor noticed. His head lifted sharply. "Is something wrong?" he asked, voice edged with irritation. Mira froze. Her throat tightened around a silence. 1,000 reasons to say nothing rushed to the surface. Fear, debt, anonymity, the fragile scaffolding of her life. But the anomaly wouldn't leave her alone. Her eyes drifted, not to the sheikh, not to the advisors, but to a single corner of the contract where the pages didn't sit perfectly flush. A tiny misalignment, no more than a millimeter, as if one sheet had been replaced or reprinted. Her breath caught. A contract of this magnitude would be printed in a single batch on calibrated machines with identical alignment. Any deviation meant human intervention, meaning that page wasn't born with the others. Another advisor followed her gaze, frowning. What's she looking at? The sheikh stiffened, annoyance flashing across his features. She's a waitress. She's looking at nothing. But Mira couldn't unsee it now, the faint shift in tone between the third and fourth page, like different ink batches. The subtle indentation suggesting one sheet had been scanned, not originally drafted. And, most damning, the microscopic difference in font density on the clause she'd glimpsed earlier. 3 anomalies. Together they formed a pattern. Her pulse hammered so loudly she feared the room could hear it. The chief advisor slid the pages back into alignment, too quickly, as if covering something. Mira flinched. The sheikh noticed that. He turned to her fully for the first time tonight. His gaze sharpened. "You," he said, "why do you keep staring at my document?" The room stilled. The advisors exchanged looks, confusion, annoyance, disbelief. Mira opened her mouth. No sound came out. Every survival instinct screamed at her to back away, bow, apologize, vanish. But the anomaly, that tiny shift in alignment, repeated in her mind like a drum. Finally, she managed a whisper. "I thought I saw something unusual." The advisors burst into overlapping scoffs. "She's mistaken. She doesn't understand what she's looking at. This is absurd." But the sheikh didn't join them. He watched her with unsettling precision, as though evaluating the weight of her words. "Unusual," he repeated. Her fingers curled against the tray. She should walk away. She knew she should. But something inside her, the part that survived libraries, manuscripts, collapsed futures, refused to let this contract swallow him without warning. The smallest inconsistencies always speak the loudest. The sheikh lowered the pen again, deliberately this time, ignoring her, dismissing the moment, sealing the future with a gesture that felt inevitable. Ink would hit paper in seconds. Mira's heartbeat was a frantic, rising drum. Her vision tunneled to the contract, its margins, its spacing, its misaligned page, the artificiality she could now feel radiating from it. She knew what would happen if she stayed silent. He would sign. He would inherit unknown liabilities. And she would walk home with minimum wage tips, carrying the guilt of having seen the trap and done nothing. Her throat tightened. "No," she whispered, too softly for anyone to hear. The pen touched the page. Mira stepped forward. Not a half step. Not a shift. A full, unmistakable movement into the center of the room. "Your Highness," she said, voice breaking. "Please, don't sign that." The advisors froze. The sheikh looked up sharply, pen hovering mid-stroke. "What did you just say?" Mira's legs trembled, but her voice found its strength in the fear. "There's something wrong with the contract." A stunned silence snapped through the room. Then came the laughter, sharp, incredulous, dripping with superiority. One advisor scoffed, "She's overstepped. Remove her." Another added, "This is a waitress trying to involve herself in a $240 million transaction." A third muttered, "Ridiculous." But the sheikh didn't laugh. He watched her, intently, unsettlingly, like a man listening for the one note the orchestra refused to play. "Explain," he said. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't expected that word, certainly not from him. I'm not qualified to speak," she said, trembling. "But I saw inconsistencies, page alignment, ink variation, a clause that seems written in a different legal register, the spacing—" One advisor cut her off. "Your Highness, she's mistaken. She lacks the training." Mira's voice sharpened. I catalogued manuscripts for years." She didn't raise her volume, but the clarity pierced the room. "I've studied more forged documents than all of you combined." The advisors erupted again. "She's lying. She's desperate for attention. She's trying to sabotage." Mira swallowed. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the tray to steady them. "If I'm wrong," she said softly, "I will leave this room and never speak again. But if I'm right, you're about to sign a liability trap that transfers debts to your name." The sheikh's expression shifted. Subtle. Dangerous. He lifted the pen away from the page. The advisors blanched. "Show me," he said. Mira exhaled shakily, caught between terror and inevitability. Every catastrophe begins with someone too afraid to speak. Mira stepped closer to the table, each movement careful, as though the contract itself were a creature that might lash out. The advisors stiffened, forming a barricade of tailored suits and wounded pride. "She shouldn't touch anything," one protested. "She won't," the sheikh said. A simple statement, but absolute. The barrier of advisors parted. Mira set the tray down and leaned in slowly. She didn't sit. She didn't reach. She simply looked. And when she spoke, her voice carried a calm that contradicted the tremor in her hands. "Start with the spacing," she said. "Here." She gestured to the lower third of the fourth page. In the first section, the line spacing's machine perfect, consistent to 0.09 millimeters. But here, it widens slightly, only by a fraction. She paused. That only happens when a paragraph is replaced manually. One advisor snorted. "This is nonsense. Spacing shifts all the time. Not in this type of printing," Mira cut in gently. "Not when the entire batch is produced in one run." Her eyes moved to the ink. "Second anomaly," she continued. "The density of the black is different. Look closely. The top half of the page has a deeper tone. The lower clause is slightly matte. That happens when a section is scanned, then reprinted, then inserted. The toner settles differently." The sheikh leaned forward, examining it himself. His expression darkened. An advisor rushed to intervene. "Your Highness, the scanners used for these documents are top tier. No such variation would—" "Third anomaly," Mira said, her voice firm now, gaining rhythm. She pointed to a line of text. "The legal register changes. In the earlier pages, the phrasing uses a modern corporate style. Direct, compressed, with standardized liability terminology. But this clause—" She let her fingertip hover above the line. "It uses an older arbitration syntax, the kind designed to obscure responsibility beneath layered cross-references." The sheikh's gaze flicked sharply to his advisors. None met his eyes. Mira inhaled, steadying herself. "The transition phrase here, 'subject to the prior determinations therein,' isn't used anywhere else in the contract. That's deliberate. It signals a buried cross-reference." She flipped gently to the earlier section. The advisors winced. "See? There is no prior determination. Well, the reference points to a clause that doesn't exist, meaning this clause is orphaned, anchored to nothing." She looked up, meeting the sheikh's eyes for the first time. "And an orphan clause can be used to transfer liabilities without triggering default protections. A legal sleight of hand." The room froze. Mira continued softly, the forensic clarity sharpening her words. "If you sign this, everything the seller owes becomes yours. All debts, all exposure, every hidden liability. And you won't be able to contest it because this clause reverses the burden of proof." That landed like a detonation. In simple terms, you would lose even if you won. A cold, crawling silence spread across the suite. The sheikh slowly placed the pen down. Truth has a weight that can tilt an entire room. The sheikh's fingers hovered above the contract, no longer steady. He wasn't a man easily rattled. The world knew him as someone who negotiated with oil ministers and litigated with sovereign funds. But now, his advisor's confidence had evaporated, leaving only the sterile scent of panic. "Explain the mechanism," he said quietly. Not to them, to her. Mira swallowed, feeling every eye in the room pin her in place. She hadn't spoken this much in a year, not to strangers, not to men whose wealth could shatter her life with a gesture, but she saw the trap clearly now. And there was no path back into silence. She pointed to the grafted clause again. This section redefines what counts as an obligation. It broadens the term without declaring the expansion. That alone is suspicious. She traced the next line with her gaze, not her hand. And here, this sentence redirects all pending compliance actions to the acquirer, meaning you assume responsibility for regulatory filings that were intentionally left incomplete. The sheikh's jaw tightened. One advisor stepped in, trying to reclaim control. "With respect, sir, she is overinterpreting. These are standard risk allocations." "No, they're not," Mira said. Her voice didn't rise, but the calm certainty in it cut through the man's protest like a wire through fabric. The structure is designed to appear standard, but the linguistic markers are from 3 different drafting hands. That never happens in a clean contract. She moved to the next anomaly. This footnote is spaced differently. It's been added after the document's final pagination. And the phrasing, subject to rectification without prejudice, is a legal doorway. It allows the seller to modify disclosures after the transaction closes. The sheikh's eyes sharpened. "Modify? How?" Mira inhaled shakily. "By declaring losses that weren't originally reported." Silence detonated across the room. One advisor stammered, "Your Highness, that's not possible." Mira continued, her voice steadier with each word. "It is. Because this clause binds you to accept all retroactive disclosures as if you were aware of them at signing. Meaning, they can reveal new debts tomorrow or next month or next year, and you cannot contest them. Not in arbitration, not in court." The sheikh's expression darkened into something dangerous. "And the indemnification?" he asked. Mira exhaled. "That clause doesn't protect you." She held the page gently. "It protects them. If you try to challenge the retroactive disclosures, you owe their legal fees." The advisors paled. Mira continued in a whisper, not out of fear, but out of the crushing weight of what she was about to say. "In practical terms, Your Highness, this contract is not an acquisition." She met his eyes fully. "It's a transfer of collapse. You were meant to inherit a failing entity and pay to defend the people who hid it from you." The sheikh leaned back slowly, as if absorbing a blow. "Ambition blinds faster than darkness." The sheikh pushed the contract aside with 2 fingers, as if the paper itself had become contaminated. The advisors stiffened in their seats, some outraged, some terrified, some calculating how much blame they could redirect before the night ended. "Which one of you reviewed this?" he asked, voice cold enough to crystallize air. Silence. No advisor dared to speak. Mira stood very still, hands clasped in front of her, wishing she could sink through the polished floor. She had no power here, only her voice, which she had already used too much. She expected the men to devour each other quickly, to redirect attention away from her. But the sheikh turned back to her instead. "You saw what my team did not," he said. "Not praise, not admiration, a statement carved from disbelief." Mira lowered her eyes. She hadn't meant to embarrass them. She had only wanted him not to destroy his empire with one signature. One advisor finally broke. "Your Highness, with respect, this is a misunderstanding. The document was prepared by the seller's counsel." Our office simply accepted their formatting for efficiency. Efficiency? The sheikh's voice cracked like a whip. For a contract worth nearly $250 million? Another advisor jumped in defensively. There was no reason to suspect fraud. The due diligence teams, Mira said softly, never saw this version. The men whipped their heads toward her. She continued, voice quiet but unshakably clear. The anomalies indicate one thing. This page was replaced after final review. That means the auditors reviewed a different draft. The sheikh's eyes flared, dark, volcanic. And how do you know this? One advisor demanded, grasping for a weakness. Mira's breath caught. She hadn't wanted to talk about her past, but running from it now would only make her look suspicious. I worked in manuscript preservation, she said. Draft histories are visible to anyone trained to notice them. Manuscripts are not contracts, the advisor snapped. No, she replied, but fraud is always the same. It hides in structure, not content. A heavy silence fell. Another advisor spoke up more quietly. Your Highness, even if some sections were modified, the intention may not have been malicious. Errors happen, miscommunications. Mira shook her head. This wasn't an error, this was orchestrated. The clause reverses burden, redirects liabilities, and masks retroactive disclosures. Whoever inserted it understood exactly what they were doing. The sheikh pressed his knuckles to his lips, thinking. A single vein pulsed in his temple. Finally, he looked at his men, one by one. How long? He asked. Have I been paying salaries for advisors who cannot read what a waitress sees in 5 seconds? No one dared to breathe. Mira felt the room contracting around her again, not with danger now, but with the aftershock of truth detonated too suddenly. Power doesn't collapse loudly. It collapses in silence, then demands someone to blame. The sheikh leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes slicing through each advisor with quiet, surgical precision. Rage would have been easier, predictable, explosive, temporary. But this was not rage. This was calculation, the kind that ends careers. Bring me, he said slowly, the original draft you received from the seller. One advisor swallowed. Your Highness, we don't have it here. Then call for it. We can't. It's past midnight. The offices are... Call, the sheikh repeated, voice an icy blade. The man fumbled for his phone, hands shaking. Another advisor wiped his forehead with a trembling handkerchief. A third stared fixedly at the table, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Their confidence, once thick enough to command the room, had evaporated like steam off hot metal. Mira remained by the wall, feeling the shift, subtle but profound. Moments ago, she had been the invisible one. Now the room felt suspended around her, anchored to her words, her observations, her impossible presence. The advisor on the phone stepped away, murmuring urgently into the receiver. When he returned, his face had lost all color. Your Highness, the seller's office claims the draft we received was the final version. Nothing more. The sheikh's jaw contracted. And the auditors? He asked. Their review documents? The advisor's voice cracked. They have a version with different pagination. Different pagination. Mira felt her stomach drop. That confirmed it. The contract had been switched after the auditors completed their review. The seller had waited until the last moment, until tonight, until right now, to slip in the modified clause. It's deliberate, Mira whispered before she could stop herself. Every head turned. She continued carefully, forcing her voice steady. The seller wanted the switch invisible long enough for you to sign. The grafted clause is positioned where eyes stop paying attention. After the valuations, before the final signature page. It's a classic misdirection technique. The chief advisor shook his head in disbelief. "We conducted a full review." "No," she said gently. "You conducted a full review of a different document, the one they wanted you to see." The sheikh stared at the contract as if it were venomous. "Mira," he said quietly. Her name, spoken by him, felt unreal. "You said earlier that this mechanism would transfer collapse to me. Explain the scale." She hesitated. "I don't know the exact amounts, but based on the structure, it could be catastrophic." "How catastrophic?" She swallowed. "Hundreds of millions," she whispered. "Maybe more. And all shielded by the indemnification clause. You would pay for their failures, their lawsuits, their penalties, and their defense." One advisor finally broke completely. "This is impossible. This can't be happening." But it was. The sheikh stood slowly, the chair legs scraping faintly against the floor. "This," he said, voice low, "was an attempt to destroy me." In high-stakes rooms, collapse doesn't roar. It reveals itself with a single, undeniable truth. The sheikh remained standing, one hand braced against the table, the other hanging motionless at his side. Power looked different on him now, less ornamental, more lethal. The advisors watched him with the paralyzed silence of men awaiting judgment. "Who handled the final delivery?" he asked. 3 advisors answered at once, each contradicting the other. Voices tangled, accusations flicked like knives. A desperate, scrambling chaos. Mira stepped back instinctively, as if distance could shield her from the implosion happening in real time. "Enough," the sheikh said softly. It was somehow worse than shouting. Each man froze. Even the air paused, waiting. He nodded toward the contract. This document left someone's hands last. Someone approved a version no one else reviewed. Someone allowed a liability bomb to be placed under my signature. No advisor dared to blink. "Your Highness," one of them began, voice trembling. "These allegations, they're not allegations," the sheikh interrupted. He lifted the grafted page between 2 fingers. "Look, a child could see this was altered." He turned to Mira. "You saw it." A shiver ran through her. She didn't want to be tied to their downfall. She didn't want power. She only wanted to prevent a disaster. But she couldn't unbe part of the moment now. She had stepped into the center without meaning to. The sheikh looked back to his advisors. "All of you," he said, "were blind." One advisor's face flushed. "Your Highness, she is not trained in law. And yet, she can explain legal deception more clearly than any of you." Another advisor tried a different tactic, looking at Mira as though she were a threat that needed to be neutralized. "We don't know her background. She could be working for the seller." But the sheikh cut him off with a gesture sharp enough to silence the room. "No," he said. "If she worked for them, I would be bankrupt already." The implication dropped like a stone. Another advisor whispered, almost pleading, "This must be escalated privately." "It will be," the sheikh said. "But first, accountability begins in this room." He called a name. One advisor flinched. "You coordinated the final packet," the sheikh said. "You claimed to verify every page. Did you?" The man's lips parted. No words came out. Mira saw the micro-reaction. A flicker of fear, then guilt, then something that looked like calculation. A man caught between confessing and surviving. He whispered, "I reviewed what was sent to me." "What was sent to you?" the sheikh repeated. His eyes narrowed. "So someone sent you the wrong version." The advisor's silence was admission. The sheikh straightened. "You will provide every message, every email, every timestamp, tonight. You will hand over your phone. And if there is a single discrepancy—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The advisor collapsed back into his chair as if the weight of consequence had finally chosen a place to land. Mira watched quietly, heart heavy. She had uncovered the trap, but now she was witnessing the price. Truth never arrives alone. It always brings accountability with it. The advisor sat motionless, eyes darting between the contract and the sheikh, as though searching for an escape that didn't exist. His hands twitched toward his phone, then away, then back again, small, involuntary movements of a man realizing there was no version of the night where he walked out unscathed. The sheikh extended his hand. "Your phone." The advisor hesitated, half a second too long. "Now," the sheikh said. A slow, shaking surrender. The device slid across the obsidian table like a confession etched in glass. Another advisor shifted in his chair, anxiety radiating from him in jittery pulses. "Your Highness, perhaps we should pause and—" "No." The sheikh's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "We are not pausing. We are uncovering." He unlocked the phone with the advisor's forced fingerprint and scrolled. Mira couldn't see the screen, but she saw his reaction, the tightening of his jaw, the sudden stillness, the quiet fury beginning to condense. Then he read aloud. "Insert revised page. Ensure alignment looks consistent. Do not alert internal counsel." The room inhaled sharply. Mira felt her stomach flip. Part validation, part dread. The sheikh continued reading, each line a blade. "Clause 14b must remain buried. He will sign fast. He never reads the final pages." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Irreversible. The accused advisor stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "Your Highness, I didn't write that. I was following instructions." "Whose instructions?" the sheikh asked. I don't know. It came from the seller's liaison. They said it was a formatting correction." Mira's voice, soft but unflinching, broke into the chaos. A formatting correction would never require secrecy. The advisor spun toward her. "You don't understand the pressure we were under." But the sheikh cut him off. "She understands more than all of you combined." The advisor froze. Another advisor, a younger one with too many rings and not enough wisdom, tried to salvage the moment. "Your Highness, perhaps she's misinterpreting the intent. Corporate acquisitions are—" "Stop," the sheikh said. A single word, but the final one. He turned to Mira again. "You said the clause was designed to reverse burden and bury liabilities. If he claims he didn't understand what he approved, does that matter?" Mira shook her head slowly. "In a fraud of this type, intent is irrelevant. Effect is everything." The sheikh let out a long, controlled breath. The kind a man releases only when he realizes just how close he came to ruin. He looked at his advisors, truly looked at them, and for the first time they seemed small in the glow of his assessment. "You nearly delivered my empire into someone else's fire." None of them dared respond. The sheikh turned unexpectedly back to Mira. "And you," he said quietly, "walked into the fire to pull me out." Her breath caught. She didn't know how to answer that, but she felt something shift. Not in him, in herself. Sometimes the truth doesn't collapse the room. Sometimes it rebuilds the center of it. When the storm of accusations subsided, the suite settled into an eerie quiet. The advisors sat as if awaiting sentencing, their power drained into the carpet beneath their polished shoes. Mira remained near the wall, unsure whether she was allowed to breathe, move, or simply cease existing. The sheikh approached her with slow, deliberate steps. He wasn't a man accustomed to walking toward staff. But tonight, hierarchy had been upended. "Mira," he said, her name now carrying the weight of a ledger closed with finality. "Tell me something. Why are you serving tables?" She felt heat rise into her cheeks. "I needed work." "That's not an answer," he replied. Not harsh, just precise. She clasped her hands. The university cut funding. My visa extension stalled. I lost everything that kept me in the research program. And this, he gestured around the gleaming suite, is where you ended up? She nodded, eyes lowered, just until something else opens. He exhaled with a quiet incredulity. They let someone like you fall through the cracks? Mira didn't respond. She never explained the rest to anyone. The debt, the loneliness, the exhaustion of watching other students advance while she fought bureaucracy like it was a winter wind. The sheikh studied her, expression unreadable. You saved me tonight, he said, without hesitation, without incentive, without expectation. Her voice was almost a whisper. I just didn't want you to sign something dangerous, he nodded. Slowly. Then something shifted behind his eyes, an internal calculation, but not the cold, transactional type. Not tonight. There is a forensic institute, he said. Privately funded, exceptionally selective. They analyze contracts, manuscripts, provenance disputes, anything requiring linguistic or structural expertise. Mira's breath hitched. She knew of it. People whispered about it the way scholars whispered about lost libraries, half myth, half institution, impossible to enter unless handpicked by someone with power. It's not a place that takes applications, he continued. You are invited, or you are invisible. Her chest tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because he said, I am offering to sponsor your position there. The word struck her so sharply she almost stepped back. I don't belong in a place like that. He tilted his head. You saw through a multi-million-dollar scheme in minutes. You dismantled fraud my own counsel missed. If anyone belongs there, you do. Her throat tightened with a cocktail of disbelief and terror. What would you want in return? She whispered. He shook his head once. Nothing. You already gave me what matters. Clarity. She didn't know what to say. She had spent months feeling like a shadow, a ghost, a forgotten academic haunting the edges of survival. Now, someone was offering her a future she didn't dare imagine. But every gift is also a test, especially one that forces you to confront who you really are. The sheikh's offer hung in the air, like a suspended bridge, fragile, impossible, and leading somewhere she had long ago stopped believing existed. Mira stood motionless, fingers curled against her palms, as if gripping an invisible railing. A year of invisibility had taught her one lesson. When life collapses, you stop expecting rescue. So the idea that someone, anyone, saw value in her again felt disorienting, almost painful. I don't think I'm the person you imagine, she said quietly. I'm out of practice. I haven't touched a manuscript in months. My academic access was revoked. I haven't written anything meaningful in a long time. None of that matters, the sheikh replied. His tone was calm, but not gentle, something firmer, something that refused to let her shrink back into the shadows. You think brilliance evaporates because life became difficult? No. It waits. It survives. It hides under the dust of responsibilities and fear. But it doesn't die. Her eyes stung. She blinked quickly, unwilling to let tears have a place in this room. I'm just a waitress, she whispered. He shook his head. You were never that. Tonight proved it. Behind them, the advisors watched in a silent equilibrium of resentment and awe. Their world had tilted. Mira's merely shifted, but the tremor inside her was greater than any collapse that happened at the table. She tried to steady her breathing. What exactly would the Institute expect from me? Your mind, he answered, your precision, your capacity to see what others overlook. If you accept the sponsorship, you'll receive housing, legal support for your immigration file, and full access to the Institute's archives. You'll work under a director who values the unseen." Her pulse thudded with a mixture of hope and terror. "But why me?" she asked. The sheikh gestured to the gutted contract. "Because you prevented a financial catastrophe that could have destroyed my position, my companies, even parts of my lineage assets. Not by luck, not by chance, but by understanding the language of deception better than the men who claim expertise." He stepped closer, not imposing, but resolute. "You don't need credentials to prove brilliance. Brilliance proves itself." Mira looked down at her hands. Ink stains still marked her cuticles from the notes she scribbled between shifts, trying to keep her mind alive even while scrubbing glasses and wiping tables. She had hidden those stains like shame. Now, for the first time, they looked like evidence of who she truly was. "I don't know if I'm ready," she murmured. "No one is ready for the moment their life returns to them," he said. "Say yes anyway." Her breath trembled. A year of fear. A night of truth. A doorway she had never expected. When she lifted her gaze, something inside her finally aligned. "Then, yes," she whispered. "Sometimes the hardest decision is accepting that you deserve another beginning." A year later, the Institute's reading hall felt like another universe. Long wooden tables, low amber lamps, shelves lined with vellum-bound histories. And at the far end, always the same seat, Mira worked in quiet concentration, her posture no longer apologetic, but centered, steady. Her hair was no longer pinned to hide, her clothes no longer chosen to disappear. And her name, once ignored on a plastic waitress tag, now appeared on reports circulated among legal scholars and forensic analysts. She had her own desk, her own cases, her own life. The sponsorship had done more than stabilize her. It restored something she thought had eroded forever: the belief that her mind had value. She now analyzed contested contracts, deciphered provenance disputes, reconstructed fractured archives. Work that mattered. Work that felt like breathing again. Sometimes, late at night, she remembered the dining suite, the obsidian table, the contract that almost destroyed an empire, the moment she stepped forward when silence would have been safer. And she wondered how close she came to walking out before everything changed. But mostly she understood this. When someone finally sees you, it becomes impossible to go back to being invisible. If Mira's journey moved you, share this story, because somewhere, someone brilliant is still waiting to be noticed.